The story you are about to hear is a wonderful tale of revenge and romance. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to the channel and comment with the location you're watching from. Thank you for tuning in. How is a knockout like that with an old guy like him? The kid's voice cut through the Friday night noise at Murphy's Bar and Grill in Austin, Texas. The smell of cold beer and fried food hung in the humid March air, mixed with the sound of lively conversations and the clinking of glasses. My name is Ethan Hayes and I'm 54 years old. 20 years in the Marine Corps taught me to size up problems before they find you. That night, my instincts were on high alert. These three college kids had been watching me and my wife Alice for the last hour, whispering and pointing from their corner table like hyenas, waiting for the right moment to strike. Alice squeezed my hand under the table, her fingers cool against my skin. She's 49, but people always guess she's in her late 30s. It's the way she carries herself, the discipline she's learned from me over the years, the confidence that shines in her green eyes. Tonight she was wearing that blue dress that brings out her eyes, her red hair catching the yellow bar lights like fire dancing in the dark. After 26 years of marriage, she still takes my breath away. But she also worries me. A woman like Alice always draws attention, and not all of it is welcome, especially when it comes from spoiled kids who have never been told no in their lives. "Ready to go, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice steady but low enough for only her to hear. My hand was already calculating the distance to the exit, counting the steps, the obstacles. Old survival habits never die. The loudest kid, a blonde with a backward baseball cap, stood up as we passed their table. The move was deliberate, calculated. He wanted to be seen, wanted to cause a scene. His two friends flanked him like he was leading some kind of military parade. The blonde wore a University of Texas hoodie that probably cost more than I made in a week as a private. He couldn't have weighed more than 165 pounds soaking wet. But he was acting like he owned the world. "Seriously," he said, loud enough for half the bar to hear, the alcohol making his voice braver than it really was. "What's a woman like that doing with a guy like you?" I stopped. The bar noise seemed to fade, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Alice gripped my arm tighter, her fingers digging into my skin through my shirt. In my peripheral vision, I could see other patrons turning to watch, as if they were expecting a show. The bartender, an older guy named Peter who'd known me since I came here as a young Marine on leave, looked up from wiping some glasses. There was a look of concern on his face, like he knew the night was about to take a turn nobody wanted. "She probably changes his diapers." The second kid chimed in, his voice laced with venom and cheap beer. This one was stockier, wearing a private high school letterman jacket. The kind of kid who never had to work a day in his life, who never knew the real meaning of responsibility. "Come on, babe. We'll show you what the new guys can do." The third one, tall and skinny with greasy hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in days, blocked our path to the door. "Yeah, Grandpa probably can't even get it up anymore." I looked at those boys. I really looked at them. Soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a video game controller. Designer jeans that cost a working man's monthly salary. The kind of kids who had never thrown a real punch in their life, just watched too many movies and thought they were tough. But there was something else, something that bothered me beyond the youthful arrogance. It was the way they looked at Alice. It wasn't admiration or even common lust. It was ownership. Like she was an object they could just take if they decided they wanted it. "Yeah, sure, kid," I said, shaking my head slowly. Alice knows me well enough to recognize that tone. That's the same one I used when dealing with recruits who thought they knew more than their instructor. Calm, patient, dangerous. The blonde kid mistook my restraint for weakness. He puffed out his chest like a rooster getting ready for a fight, his friends laughing behind him like a paid audience egging him on. "What's that supposed to mean, old man?" His voice was louder now, trying to draw more attention. "Nothing," I said, but my mind was already shifting into tactical mode. "We're just leaving." But as Alice and I headed for the exit, I could feel them behind us. The energy in the room had completely changed. What started as a quiet celebration now had the electric tension of a military operation about to go wrong. Peter looked at me and shook his head slightly, as if apologizing for what his establishment was about to witness. Something told me this night wasn't over. It was the same instinct that kept me alive through 2 decades of military service, the feeling in your gut when you know danger is closing in. 20 years ago, I would have handled this differently. Back when I was Sergeant Hayes teaching hand-to-hand combat at the Marine base in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, I had less patience for disrespect. In those days, a kid like that blonde would have learned his lesson in a much more direct and painful way. But Alice changed that. She taught me that real strength isn't about proving yourself to every punk who thinks he's tough. It's about protecting what matters without stooping to their level. I met her in 1998, right after my third deployment overseas. She was working as a nurse at the military hospital near the base, taking care of guys like me, who came back carrying more than just our rucksacks. We came back carrying invisible scars, memories that woke us up in the middle of the night, the weight of decisions that changed lives forever. The first time I saw her, she was holding the hand of an old World War II vet as he cried about nightmares that never left him. There was something in the way she comforted him, a combination of strength and gentleness I had never seen before. That's when I knew she was different. We got married a year later in a simple ceremony at the base chapel. Alice wanted kids and so did I, but it never happened for us. The doctors could never quite explain why. Maybe it was the years of exposure to chemicals during my service. Maybe it was just fate. Instead of letting it break us, we poured ourselves into each other. She supported me through the rough transition to civilian life when I was trying to figure out who I was without the uniform, without the military structure that had defined my identity for 2 decades. And I supported her when she decided to go back to nursing school, and then through the Masters in Hospital Administration that she did on weekends while working full-time. Now, she runs the trauma unit at University Medical Center, one of the top professionals in her field in the entire state of Texas. Tonight was supposed to be special. Alice had just been promoted to department head after 5 years of trying, and we were celebrating at Murphy's because it's where we had our first date over 2 decades ago. Same corner table, same Friday night crowd, same bartender who remembered us from when we were young and broke, when I was still adjusting to civilian life and Alice was finishing school. But those college kids had been watching us all night. I noticed them when we came in, the way their conversation stopped when Alice took off her coat, revealing the dress I'd bought her as a promotion gift, the way they nudged each other and snickered like schoolboys looking at a magazine, the way the blonde one kept craning his neck to get a better look at her, with no respect or discretion. I'd seen that look before in bars overseas, when some drunk soldier decided he wanted something that wasn't his. It always ended the same way, with someone learning a painful lesson about respect. Alice noticed too, but she's used to turning heads. 26 years of marriage, and she still makes heads turn wherever she goes. Usually I take it as a compliment, a confirmation that I'm a lucky man. Tonight felt different, more predatory. "They're just kids," she whispered when she saw me watching them more closely. "Ignore them." But as we sat there sharing a shrimp appetizer, I could overhear snippets of their conversation. Something about a waist on an old guy and "I bet she's dying for a real man." The kind of talk that crosses a line. That turned my wife into an object for their amusement. The blonde kid got up to use the restroom and had to walk right past our table. He slowed his pace deliberately, looked Alice up and down like she was a piece of meat at a butcher shop, and then winked at her with a smirk that reminded me of every predator I'd ever encountered during my years of service. Alice looked away, uncomfortable for the first time all night. Her cheeks flushed, not from flattery but from embarrassment. That's when I knew we were leaving, not because I was afraid of 3 drunk college kids, but because Alice deserved better than to spend her promotion celebration listening to their garbage. I should have known they wouldn't let it end there. Boys like that never do. The parking lot at Murphy's was poorly lit, covered in a darkness that felt thicker than it should. Only a few light posts cast long shadows between the cars, creating pockets of darkness where anything could be waiting. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and the heavy humidity that comes before a summer storm. Alice and I were halfway to my truck when I heard footsteps behind us. Not the casual steps of someone leaving the bar, but deliberate, measured steps from someone trying to be sneaky, but failing because of the alcohol. "Hey, where are you going?" The blonde's voice echoed across the asphalt, laced with false liquid courage. We weren't done talking. I stopped walking. Alice's hand found mine automatically, like it always does when she's nervous. Her fingers were trembling slightly, and I could feel her accelerated pulse through her skin. In 26 years together, she's seen me handle exactly 3 fights. Every time it was over before it began, but Alice knew that when I stopped walking like that, something serious was about to happen. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Let's just go." I turned around slowly. The 3 of them were standing there, under the yellow parking lot lights, looking like they owned the world. The blonde had his phone out, probably recording what he thought would be his big moment of glory. More content to post on social media to impress his friends. "Here's the deal," the stocky one with the Letterman jacket said, taking a step forward like he was the leader of a gang. "We think your wife might want to spend some time with real men." The tall, skinny one laughed, a nasty sound that echoed off the parking lot walls. "Yeah, before she forgets what it's like." That's when something inside me switched. Not anger exactly, because anger is an emotion that clouds your judgment. This was more like a switch flipping from one position to another. From Ethan, the civilian who worries about the power bill and the health insurance plan, to Sergeant Hayes, the man who trained Marines to fight in some of the most dangerous situations in the world. Alice felt the shift in my posture. My muscles tensed, my breathing became more controlled. "Ethan?" "It's okay, honey," I said without taking my eyes off the 3 kids. "These boys just want to dance a little." The blonde kid moved closer, mistaking my calm for weakness. "Dance? What the hell does that mean?" "It means," I said, putting my keys in Alice's palm, "that you followed us out here because you think you're tough. So let's find out." I took off my jacket, folded it neatly, and handed it to Alice. The movement was deliberate, practiced, the way I'd prepare for training exercises when I needed to demonstrate a technique for new recruits. It was also a way to buy time to assess the situation, calculate angles, identify threats. The parking lot had good visibility, no significant obstacles. The surface was firm asphalt, no potholes or debris that could cause balance issues. Most importantly, we were far enough from the main street that there was no risk of involving innocent civilians. "All right," I said, rolling up my shirt sleeves. "You want to dance? Let's go. But one rule, one at a time." The 3 of them looked at each other and started laughing. It was the kind of nervous laughter young men make when they're trying to convince themselves they're not scared. The blonde kid put his phone in his pocket and cracked his knuckles, a gesture he'd probably seen in a movie. "Are you serious, old man? You want to fight all 3 of us?" "One at a time," I repeated, my voice holding that calm tone I used to use during mission briefings. "Unless you're scared." That got to them. Young men and their pride, always their weakness. They couldn't back down now without looking like cowards in front of each other, and they definitely couldn't admit they were scared of a man 20 years their senior. Alice took a step back toward my truck. She knows what I'm capable of, even if I haven't had to show it in years. During my time on active duty, I taught defensive tactics to Marines half my age, guys who thought they were indestructible until they found out that experience and technique always beat brute force and arrogance. I know how to read an opponent's balance, their momentum, their intentions written in the angle of their shoulders and the position of their feet. These kids had no idea what they were getting into. They were telegraphing every move before they even decided to make it. The blonde kid rolled his shoulders, getting ready to advance. The other 2 flanked him, thinking numbers would give them an advantage. What they didn't understand is that 20 years of training doesn't just disappear because you put on civilian clothes and get a few wrinkles around your eyes. In fact, with age comes patience. And patience is the difference between an angry young man throwing wild punches and a veteran who knows exactly when and how to move. The blonde kid, Brandon, came at me first, just like I knew he would. College kids always lead with their ego, never with strategy. "This is for calling us kids, Grandpa," he yelled, winding up for what he probably thought was a devastating right hook. I watched him telegraph the punch for what felt like 3 full seconds. His weight shifted to his back foot. His shoulder dropped, his whole body coiling like a spring. It was textbook, so obvious any basic combat instructor could have seen it coming from a mile away. In the Marines, we say that adrenaline makes everything seem like it's in slow motion, and you can see exactly what's coming. But that only works if you've been trained to use adrenaline, not to be controlled by it. I took 1 step to my left, just enough. His fist whistled past my ear, carrying all his momentum with it, The kid had put everything he had into that punch, counting on hitting my face to stop his forward motion. When he hit nothing but air, physics took over. He stumbled forward off balance, arms windmilling as he tried to regain his footing. I didn't even have to push him. I just got out of the way and let him run face first into the brick wall of Murphy's Bar and Grill. The sound was like a ripe melon hitting concrete. A wet, definitive thud that echoed through the parking lot and made even his friends flinch back instinctively. "Brandon!" The stocky kid in the Letterman jacket yelled, rushing to help his friend. But Brandon was already down for the count. He slid down the wall, blood pouring from his broken nose, trying to understand what had just happened to his life. "My face," he mumbled through split lips, his words slurring. "You broke my face." "You broke your own face," I said, wiping imaginary dust off my shirt. "I just moved." The kid in the Letterman jacket, I'd heard the blonde call him Tyler a few times during the night, looked at me with new eyes. Some of the arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. But he was still young enough to think he could salvage the situation. "You got lucky with Brandon," Tyler said, taking off his jacket like a boxer getting ready for a fight. "But I played high school football." "Good for you," I said, taking a relaxed but balanced stance. "High school football teaches you to run in a straight line at people who are also running in a straight line. This is different." Tyler lowered his shoulder and charged like he was going for a tackle, just as I expected. High school football tactics against someone who spent 2 decades training Marines in hand-to-hand combat. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. I waited until he was 2 steps away. Then I grabbed his outstretched arms and used his own momentum to spin him sideways. Basic martial arts principle I'd taught hundreds of times: redirect force instead of opposing it. Tyler found himself spinning in a direction he never intended to go, his feet leaving the ground for a moment before he slammed hard into the side of the large garbage dumpster behind Murphy's. The impact made the metal ring out like a cracked bell, a sound that probably woke people in nearby houses. But his momentum wasn't finished. The dumpster was just high enough that when Tyler hit it at waist level, his legs kept going up and over. For a moment, he seemed to hang in the air, arms flailing, before he disappeared inside the dumpster with a wet thud. "Help!" came his muffled voice from inside the bin. "I'm stuck." I looked over the edge. Tyler was wedged upside down between garbage bags, his legs sticking out, his Letterman jacket tangled around his head. He was flailing like an overturned turtle, his movements only managing to wedge him deeper into the trash. The smell rising from the dumpster was indescribable. Rotting food scraps, rancid grease, and other things I preferred not to identify. Tyler was going to be wearing that smell for days, no matter how many showers he took. 20 years in the Marines taught me patience, boys, I said, straightening my shirt. It also taught me about leverage. The third kid, the tall, skinny one, was backing away now. His name was Justin. I'd overheard during their loud conversations in the bar. He kept looking between his 2 friends. Brandon still slumped against the wall, holding his bloody nose and moaning softly. Tyler struggling helplessly in the dumpster, his protests muffled by trash bags, and me standing there calmly, not even breathing hard. My hands were clean, my clothes didn't have a single wrinkle out of place. "This is insane," Justin said, his voice going up an octave. "You can't just assault people." "Assault?" I raised an eyebrow. "Son, I haven't laid a finger on either of your friends. They assaulted themselves." But even as I spoke, I could see Justin calculating his options. He could run, and he should have, but his male pride wouldn't let him. He could call the police, but then he'd have to explain why 3 college kids followed a couple into a dark parking lot. Or he could try to salvage some dignity. Justin pulled out his phone with trembling hands. "I'm calling the cops." "Good idea," I said. "Make sure you tell them how 3 young men followed a married couple into a dark parking lot and threatened them." That's when Justin made his mistake. Instead of just calling the police or leaving, he decided he needed to save a little face. While he was talking tough about calling the cops, he was also winding up for a sucker punch, thinking he could catch me while I wasn't looking. But in the Marines, you learn to watch everything at once. Peripheral vision becomes a survival skill. You can't afford to focus on just one threat when there might be others closing in. Justin threw a wild punch, a haymaker aimed at the side of my head. I ducked slightly, and his fist connected squarely with the parking meter behind me. The crack of his knuckles hitting cast iron echoed through the parking lot like dry branches snapping. Justin screamed, not a yell or a roar, but a high-pitched shriek of pure agony that probably woke up half the neighborhood. He clutched his right hand to his chest, tears streaming down his face as the reality of the situation finally started to sink into his drunken mind. "My hand," he whimpered like a small child. "You broke my hand." "You broke your own hand," I said, the same way I used to explain consequences to new recruits who made poor choices during training. "You punched a parking meter." By now, people were coming out of Murphy's to see what the commotion was about. Peter, the bartender, stood in the doorway, shaking his head as if he wasn't surprised by the outcome. A few other patrons had their phones out, filming the aftermath, probably already posting to social media. Brandon was still against the wall, blood all over his UT hoodie, looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. Tyler was still upside down in the dumpster, his movements getting weaker as he tired himself out fighting the trash bags. Justin was sitting on the asphalt, cradling his broken hand and sobbing like a child. "Someone call an ambulance," Justin pleaded to the growing crowd. "Please." "Already did," said a woman I recognized from inside the bar, as soon as we heard the screaming. Alice walked over and handed me my jacket. She had that look, the one that told me she was seeing her husband the way she did 27 years ago when we first met. Not the middle-aged insurance salesman who worried about the lawn and retirement, but the Marine who could handle anything life threw at him. "You okay, honey?" I asked, putting on the jacket. The fabric was still warm from her touch. "Perfect," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Absolutely perfect." That's when Justin made one last desperate play to save his shattered dignity. "He assaulted us," he yelled to the crowd, pointing at me with his good hand. "This old guy attacked 3 innocent college students." Peter stepped forward, wiping his hands on a bar towel. "Son, I saw the whole thing from the bar window. You 3 followed this couple out here and started the trouble. This gentleman didn't throw a single punch." "It's true," said the woman who called the ambulance, waving her phone. "I was recording the commotion. I got the whole thing. These kids hurt themselves trying to fight someone who clearly knew what he was doing." Other patrons started to agree, their voices overlapping as they recounted their versions of events. The narrative was forming, and it wasn't favorable to the 3 college kids. Justin's face went pale as he realized his version of the story wasn't going to stick. But he must have done something," he insisted, his voice growing more desperate. "He moved," Peter said simply. "You boys did all the damage to yourselves." The sound of sirens was getting closer, ambulance and police by the growing noise. Alice squeezed my arm. "We should probably stay and give our statement." "Already planning on it," I said. "The truth is always the best defense." The truth was starting to dawn on those 3 kids. They had picked a fight with someone they assumed was an easy target, and instead, they had humiliated themselves in front of witnesses. Worse, they did it while being recorded from multiple angles. Tyler finally managed to scramble out of the dumpster, but his Letterman jacket was ruined, and he was covered in whatever had been rotting in there. He smelled of old food and shame, an aroma that would probably take days to wash off his skin. "This isn't over," Brandon muttered through his swollen lips, but there was no conviction in his words. Just the bitter lament of someone who had just learned a hard lesson about respect. "Yes, it is," I said. It was over before it even started. The ambulance pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 police cruisers. Their red and blue lights painted everything in a surreal glow, like a disco from hell. As the paramedics started checking on the 3 college kids, I could see the realization hitting their faces. They would have to explain to their parents, their friends, their professors, their frat brothers, how they got humiliated by a 54-year-old man who hadn't even thrown a punch. They would have to live with this story for the rest of their lives. Alice was right about one thing. This was definitely not how we had planned to end our celebration dinner, but somehow, it felt exactly like it was supposed to end. Officer Patricia Williams took our statements while her partner, Officer Drummond, dealt with the 3 students. I knew Patricia from years of working with veteran support groups at the hospital where Alice worked. She was a sharp cop who didn't fall for dramatic stories. She listened to my account with professional interest, occasionally glancing at the cell phone videos the witnesses had voluntarily provided. The parking lot was filled with evidence, all of it favoring our version of events. So, let me get this straight, Patricia said, reviewing her notes. They followed you into the parking lot, made verbal, sexual, and physical threats, and then each injured themselves while attempting to attack you. Correct, I said. I used their momentum against them. Basic defensive tactics. Defensive tactics, Patricia repeated, jotting it down. From your military service. 20 years in the Marine Corps, I confirmed. Sergeant, retired in 2018. Alice stood beside me, still holding my hand. I could feel her pride in the way she squeezed my fingers every time I answered a question. After so many years of just being the head nurse's husband, it felt strange to be seen again as the soldier I used to be. Near the ambulance, the 3 boys were getting patched up. Brandon needed stitches on his nose and forehead, his face looking like a road map of cuts and bruises. Justin's hand was definitely broken, probably in several places from how swollen and purple it was. Tyler was mostly unharmed physically, but he still reeked of garbage, and his dignity was in tatters. The problem is, said Officer Drummond, walking over from where he was interviewing the kids, their stories don't match what the witnesses saw. How so? Patricia asked. They're claiming Mr. Hayes here attacked them first, Drummond explained, but we have 3 different cell phone videos showing them following the couple into the lot and initiating the physical confrontation. I wasn't surprised. Young men caught in embarrassing situations always try to rewrite the story to make themselves look less pathetic. It was basic human nature. They also insist he must have hit them somehow, Drummond continued. They can't accept that they hurt themselves. Peter, the bartender, approached our group, wiping his hands on his apron. Officers, I've been a bartender for 30 years. I've seen every kind of fight you can imagine. What happened here wasn't a fight. It was 3 drunk kids trying to mess with someone they thought was an easy target and getting a lesson in physics. The paramedics were loading Justin into the ambulance, his broken hand in a temporary splint. Brandon refused transport, but he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Tyler was being questioned separately by a 3rd officer who had arrived as backup. Are we free to go? Alice asked. Patricia nodded. We have your contact information if we need anything else, but honestly, this looks like an open and shut case. 3 intoxicated individuals harassed a couple and then injured themselves while trying to assault them. As we walked to my truck, I could hear Justin's voice from the ambulance, talking on his cell phone to someone. Probably his parents, judging by the defensive, desperate tone. Mom, you don't understand, he was saying. This old guy, he had to be some kind of martial arts expert or something. He took us apart without even trying. Alice laughed softly. Martial arts expert? Close enough, I said, opening the door for her. Just an old soldier who still remembers a few things. As I started the engine, Tyler walked past our truck, still stinking of garbage, his ruined Letterman jacket slung over his arm. He looked through the windshield at me, with something like respect mixed with fear. It was an expression I recognized from my days as an instructor. Brandon was leaning against a friend's car, holding tissues to his still bleeding nose, talking rapidly on the phone. Every few words he'd gesture in my direction, probably trying to explain to someone how he had been so thoroughly humiliated. They're going to remember tonight for the rest of their lives, Alice said as we pulled out of the parking lot. Good, I said. Maybe next time they'll think twice before harassing someone. But I had a feeling the consequences for those 3 were just beginning. In an age of social media and viral videos, public humiliation doesn't stay confined to a parking lot in Austin. 2 weeks later, Alice showed me the video on her phone over breakfast. The aroma of fresh coffee hung in the kitchen, mixed with the smell of toast and the soft light of a Sunday morning. Honey, you have to see this, she said, barely containing her laughter. The clip had over 2 million views across various social media platforms. Someone had compiled all 3 witness videos into a single piece, complete with slow-motion replays and witty commentary. The title read, 3 college frat boys get schooled by Marine grandpa without a single punch thrown. I watched myself calmly step out of the way as Brandon met the brick wall. Then, Tyler's spectacular dive into the dumpster played in slow motion set to dramatic action movie music. Finally, Justin's encounter with the parking meter, his shriek echoing over freeze frames of his shocked expression. It's everywhere, Alice said, scrolling through the comments. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, someone even turned it into a meme. The comments were brutal for the 3 college kids. Imagine being so weak. You get beat up by physics. These kids really thought they were tough. That Marine didn't even break a sweat. When keeping it real goes wrong, respect is earned, not demanded. But the real consequences went deeper than social media mockery. Alice had heard through her connections at the hospital that all 3 boys had been identified by UT students who recognized them from the video. Their full names, their frat houses, their social media accounts, it was all public knowledge now. The internet had worked its collective detective magic, and there was nowhere to hide. Now the university had launched a disciplinary investigation after the video went viral. Apparently, harassing members of the community reflected poorly on the institution's reputation, especially when captured in high-definition video and shared millions of times. Brandon and Tyler were facing possible suspension. Justin was already on academic probation for other infractions, and this incident pushed him toward full expulsion. The college athletic department had suspended all 3 indefinitely, pending the university's final decision. The very organization that taught them they were untouchable was now distancing itself from them as fast as possible, afraid the association might hurt its funding programs. "Look at this one," Alice said, showing me a comment from someone claiming to know them personally. "These guys used to act like they owned the campus. Now they can't show their faces anywhere without people laughing." The viral video had become a case study in modern consequences. Every campus security office in the state was using it in presentations on harassment and assault. Every self-defense instructor was showing it to demonstrate how proper training could neutralize threats without violence. 3 young men who started the night thinking they were going to humiliate an older couple had instead provided the internet with weeks of entertainment at their own expense. But there was one twist that neither Alice nor I expected. 3 months after the incident, I was in line at the grocery store when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and found Brandon, the blonde kid who had started it all at Murphy's. He looked completely different. Thinner, more serious, with a faint scar on his forehead where he'd met the brick wall. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice hesitant. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" My first reaction was tension. Old instincts die hard. But then I saw his eyes. There was no anger there, no thirst for revenge. Just something that looked suspiciously like shame. "Sure," I said, stepping out of the line. "I just wanted to say," he started, then stopped, clearly struggling with the words. "I wanted to apologize for what we did that night, for what I did." I studied his face for a moment. The youthful arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something that seemed genuinely reflective. "And?" I said, wanting to hear more. "I got expelled from UT," he continued. "Lost my scholarship. My parents were so ashamed they sent me to live with my grandmother in Waco." He paused, running a hand over the scar on his forehead. "But you know what's funny? It was the best thing that ever happened to me." Now I was really interested. "How so?" "My grandmother doesn't have internet," he explained. "No social media, no watching videos online. She just saw me as her grandson, who was going through a tough time. She put me to work in her garden, made me help the elderly neighbors with their groceries, taught me how to cook." He looked me straight in the eye. For the first time in my life, I had to learn what it means to respect people. For real. Brandon told me he had enrolled in a community college in Waco, paying his own tuition with money he earned working part-time at a hardware store. It wasn't the glamorous life he had planned, but it was a life he was building with his own 2 hands. "I watch that video sometimes," he said, "to remind myself of who I never want to be again." "And your friends?" I asked. "Tyler managed to get back into college, but in another state. I think he's still trying to hide from what happened. Justin..." Brandon shook his head. "Justin didn't handle it well. He blames everyone but himself." We talked for a few more minutes. Brandon told me about his plans to graduate and maybe start his own business, about how his grandmother had taught him that honest work was worth more than social status, about how he was learning to treat people with real respect, not just superficial politeness. As we were saying goodbye, he hesitated for a moment. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Hayes?" "Sure. Did you plan all that? The way each of us got hurt?" So I thought about the question. "I didn't plan the specific details," I said, "but I knew that if you attacked without thinking, Physics would do the rest of the work. Brandon nodded slowly. My grandmother says that sometimes life teaches you lessons you don't want to learn, but that you need to learn anyway. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She is, he said with a small but genuine smile. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, for not really hurting me when you could have. As I drove home, I thought about that conversation. Alice always said that every person we meet teaches us something, even if we don't realize it at the time. Maybe that night at Murphy's taught more than just a lesson about respect. Maybe it was about second chances. 6 months after that night at Murphy's Bar and Grill, Alice and I went back to celebrate our wedding anniversary. Peter greeted us at the door with a huge grin that lit up his whole wrinkled face. The famous couple, he announced to the room. Free drinks for our local celebrities. The corner table where we had sat that night was now unofficially known as the Hayes table. Peter had even put up a small, discreet plaque where respect was earned and lessons were learned. Over dinner, Alice filled me in on what she'd discovered about our other 2 young acquaintances through her network at the hospital and on social media. Tyler had transferred to a college in Oklahoma after his frat permanently kicked him out. He was studying agricultural business, and from his rare social media posts, seemed to be doing well far from the spotlight of Austin. Justin had faced the worst consequences. His broken hand required multiple surgeries and months of painful physical therapy. The injury permanently ended his dreams of playing professional baseball. Combined with his expulsion from the university, he lost his athletic and academic future in a single night of bad decisions. According to what Alice had heard, he was living with his parents and going to therapy, trying to cope with the depression that came after losing everything he thought defined his identity. Do you ever feel bad for them? Alice asked, delicately cutting her grilled salmon. I thought about it for a moment, watching the same Friday night crowd that had witnessed their downfall months ago. Young couples on dates, families out for dinner, older folks like us enjoying a quiet evening. Life going on as normal. They made their choices, I said finally. Actions have consequences. I just helped them learn that lesson a little faster than they might have otherwise. Alice smiled and raised her glass of red wine. 2 consequences then. 2 consequences, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. As we left Murphy's that night, I held the door for Alice and watched her step out into the parking lot where 3 young men had learned the hardest lesson of their lives. The post lights cast the same long shadows, but everything felt different now, peaceful, resolved. Brandon, Tyler, and Justin found out that the world doesn't owe you respect just because you demand it. That true strength isn't about intimidating people who seem weaker than you. That some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The public humiliation followed them across social media platforms and into their real lives, costing them friendships, academic opportunities, and social standing within their community. The viral video had become a permanent record of their poor judgment, searchable by future employers, potential romantic partners, and anyone else who might look up their names online. Their attempts to play the victim backfired when witnesses and video evidence contradicted their claims, leaving them to face not just the physical consequences, but also the loss of credibility and respect from family, friends, and institutions. All 3 learned that some mistakes echo far beyond the moment they are made. That 20 seconds of bad decisions can reshape entire futures. That a person's true character is revealed, not when things are going well, but when they face adversity. Sometimes the best victories are the ones where you never have to throw a punch. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in letting life teach its own lessons. And sometimes, just sometimes, those lessons stick. At least for some.